Greetings, compañeros and compañeras. We're here today with Tassos and Cici talking about the historic uprisings of 2025. Although youth protests have existed even as far back as ancient Egypt, they become very distinctive with the internet generation, or Gen Z as they're called. Of course, there's a lot of media attention about Gen Z. It's said, for instance, that Gen Z has replaced the millennial pout with a sneer, that Gen Z is attracted to Eastern medicines, that Gen Z dress a certain way and use a certain vocabulary. But left out of most accounts of Gen Z is the historic uprisings of 2025. Now, Gen Z uprisings we trace to Sri Lanka 3 years earlier in 2022, when they compelled the ruling Rajapaksa family to step down in leaving the country for a short time, but they returned. But then tracing that through other uprisings, particularly Bangladesh, beginning in 2024, when some 1,400 people were killed by the police trying to repress the uprising against Sheikh Hasina and her Awami League, who ruled with an iron fist and tried to privilege certain segments of young people in terms of jobs. But spectacularly, in 2025, in more than 30 countries, there were uprisings. And they reached a crescendo, as we talk about in this booklet, in September of 2025, when 11 countries experienced similar uprisings, including the Philippines from September 12th to 15th, around issues of the corruption and poor flood control channels that had been paid for by the government but never built. There were specific issues in every country, but the thrust of what happened is that the internet generation mobilized using apps such as Discord and WhatsApp and internationally coordinated their efforts, communicated with each other, shared tactics, shared tips, and created changes such that in at least 4 countries on 3 continents, governments were overthrown. This is pretty spectacular when you think that older activists often say, be patient, you have to organize first. Gen Z showed that spontaneously, lots of people going in the streets together can overthrow governments, which is a great thing. I began my activism in 1969. And in the global wave of 1968, no governments were overthrown, 0. And Gen Z in a few short months overthrow several, as I said. Uprisings have been continually happening since the 1960s. The global New Left, as it was called, it existed in many countries. For instance, in the Philippines, there were protests against Marcos' government. And all over the world, from France in 1968, when there was a near revolution and 9 million workers were on strike, to Italy, the hot autumn of 1969, Mexico City, where protests at the Olympics, at the coming Olympics, led to the massacre of 400 people in Tlatelolco Plaza in 1968. In the United States, Martin Luther King was assassinated, and there were more riots than there had ever been. In fact, for the first time since the American Civil War in 1865, machine guns were mounted on the Capitol building and the White House lawn. So fearful was the establishment. And of course, the Black Panther Party led a multiracial, multinational coalition to write a new constitution for the world. So after the 60s, immediately there was a disarmament movement that had millions of participants and that won an end to the arms race, which led to Many other developments, for instance, the overthrow of the Eastern European regimes that had been a buffer block between the Soviet Union and the West. Although Russia has felt the need to reestablish some kind of buffer now in the Ukraine, as the West has encroached on Russia. There was a succession of Asian uprisings in the 1980s and early 90s, beginning with the historic Gwangju uprising of 1980, a Paris Commune in Asia, 100 years after the Paris Commune, where citizens spontaneously seized power, organized an army, a citizens' army by themselves, and defeated the military, won control of the cities. This helped to inspire a wave of uprisings in the Philippines, 86, which originated the term People Power Uprisings, South Korea in 87, Burma 88, Tibet, China, Taiwan in 89, Nepal and Bangladesh in 1990, and Thailand in 1992. A total of 8 regimes were overthrown in these 6 years, including Marcos, who was compelled to move to Hawaii, where I'm sure he enjoyed himself, but not enjoying losing his powers. After the wave of Asian uprisings came that wave in Eastern Europe, overthrowing the communist bloc nations. Then we had the ultra-globalization movement from Seattle, from the Zapatistas in Mexico, the historic uprising of January 1st, 1994, through Seattle, 1999, and on into the February 14th, 2002 uprising, more than 10 million people in the streets around the world against the Iraq war before it even started. Then, of course, we have finally sparked the Arab Spring and the Occupy Wall Street protests of 2011, which reached historic proportions. Thousands of cities had occupations in this period, and the occupation of the squares in Greece and Spain, other European countries. So this was, again, this continuing wave of uprisings leads us into the Gen Z uprisings of 2025, which no doubt will continue as young people have limited opportunities because of the capitalist system's shrinking economy. Now we are faced with a terrible war in Iran, and we see that the evil president in the White House is continuing wholesale murder. He hopes without having to face criminal charges. So I call on you to continue the struggle. Gen Z and future generations will inherit a legacy of uprisings and struggles that hopefully will lead us to an overthrow of the corrupt and dangerous world system that is destroying the planet and destroying humanity. All power to the people.